Economy Borough, where this happened, is in western Pennsylvania. They have nice people, expensive houses, and they also have beautiful farms out there. Here in Beaver County, our typical crimes are one guy shoots another one, we already know who did it, and you move on. This case was not anything like that.
It was a Friday afternoon. This 15-year-old boy was walking through the woods after school. He was a young man getting interested in hunting, so he was headed up to a deer processing place where they process the deer meat for hunters, and that was when he came upon an object in the woods. At first, he had thought that it was a gut pile, something that the deer hunters do, leave them behind with a deer. And then he realized that this was a severed human head.
I'm just walking up the road and I found a human head.
How do you know it's a human head?
So I went down and it's a head.
Okay, and you left it there?
Yeah, I did not touch it. I did not do anything.
Just go stand where it's at, and they're on their way over there, okay?
Okay.
One of our officers, Officer Genetic, was dispatched to go over there.
When I arrived on scene, I noticed a teenager standing here, pointing down into the woods. I did ask him if he went down and touched it. He stated no.
We were all kind of had the thought that it was going to be a prank or something like that.
It definitely was a real head. And at that point, I contacted my chief and said, we got a real problem.
And I'm thinking, okay, this can't be good. If they're calling me, we've got something going on here. Do we have some sick individual that's out killing people, cutting up bodies someplace, and now we're spreading body parts around? Very quickly after that, I contacted Andy Gall. I told him, hey, you're not going to believe this. I said, but we have a severed head in the woods.
I've always been the go-to guy. Something weird happens, it's call Andy. My initial reaction is, this hasn't been here long. It's early December. The leaves are still falling in some parts, and this is on top of the leaves, and there's no leaves on top of it.
It was probably about 31 feet off the edge of the roadway. It appeared to be in somewhat decent condition. It wasn't decomposed. One of the remarkable things we noticed right away was the nose had a little bit of a tip to it, almost as if it had been maybe in some sort of a container or a box at one time.
Looking at it, my initial impression was it was a female.
The hair was gray, curly, fluffy, reminded us of an older woman.
Anywhere between 60 and 80 was what the guess was at that time. Usually I'm looking for the bullet wound, I'm looking for the blood pattern, but none of that's there.
We didn't even really know if a crime had been committed, but it's a murder until proven otherwise.
At that point, they had some uniformed guys spreading out through that field, looking for other parts, looking for other evidence, looking for anything. This is one of the scarcest crime scenes that I've ever been on, and one of the strangest.
This isn't something that any of us have ever handled or dealt with, but this was a human being. This is a person. We need to know who she is. We decided then that we needed to just get her out of there and get her to the morgue where we can take a better look. So we packed the head into a cooler with ice and transported her to the county morgue.
Chief Mike O'Brien The coroner and other law enforcement come into the morgue with this cooler. They open it up and they put it on the table. And Dr. James Smith and I just stood there and our jaws dropped. Is it real or is this fake? The hair was almost looked like it was combed. There was some makeup, eyes closed. Normally when you have a head on the side of the road, there's animal, insect, the weather, decomposition, none of that existed. We thought this was a head that Hollywood used to reenact something. The first thing we established was this is real. The tissue is well preserved. It has a rubbery feeling to it. Lips are firm. It holds its shape. The condition was excellent. That person was professionally and well embalmed. Whoever embalmed the body took very good care of doing it properly. This would be to make the deceased as presentable as you can to the family. They knew what they were doing. The head was severed after it was embalmed. It wasn't somebody that just took a machete or a hatchet or something and just cut the head off. They went between the spine and the joints, and they cut through the skin of the front. So it was probably done with a scalpel and other very sharp instruments. The biggest mystery of this head was when I opened the eyelids, there's plastic caps over the eyes, which is normal embalming. But to our amazement, there's no eyes. In its place, they had small red balls, which is unusual. We never seen this before. Nobody ever replaced the eyeballs with red round balls.
So we have the some of the evidence in this box. One was these red rubber balls. This was rather shocking, and this became like the big piece of evidence for us.
We thought that was going to be the key that solved this case.
We contacted several funeral homes, several mortuaries.
We thought maybe someplace, somewhere, they use red rubber balls.
My name is David Alvarez. I am currently the owner of Alvarez Hahn Funeral Home in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. I happened to be at a court hearing in Beaver County, and at that time the pathologist and Andy Gall was there, and they were talking about the situation with the head. I got included in the conversation because they knew I was a funeral director, and of course I was intrigued. So this is a plastic eye cap. These are used to simulate the contour of an eyeball. Most of the time, unless the orbit or the eyeball itself was removed, whether it be for like a organ donation or whatnot, these are placed on top of the eye itself. They give uniformity and shape to the eye when the body is prepared and embalmed. These are very, very common. With the red balls that were placed in the orbits of Jane Doe, I had never really seen the type of ball that was there. Somebody put that in there to fill a void, and then over top of that, place the eye cap to give the eye its regular shape.
I spent a period of time afterwards asking funeral directors and people who do embalming. Nobody uses red rubber balls. After looking into it, I walked to one of my regular places to have a piece of pizza. I go in, get my pizza, sit down, and right next to me, which I've never noticed before, even though I've eaten there many times, is a bubblegum machine where you can put a quarter in and get red rubber balls.
The balls were found to have come from China, which are a part of their biggest and largest selling toy.
We actually made contact with the police in China, and it turns out that these red rubber balls are so common and there's no way to track them. This is not what's supposed to be behind an eye cap. This, to me, is one of the biggest mysteries in this case. Something weird about toys being placed behind that woman's head, behind her eyes.
Brand new here, the strange discovery of an embalmed head in the woods of western Pennsylvania has police mystified.
The discovery was on Friday evening. Hunting season was coming to an end. Saturday was the last day of antler deer season. So we didn't want to get into the woods and do a search on that day. So 2 days after the head was found, we conducted a more extensive systematic search of the area.
I felt there was a good chance that we may find other body parts someplace, that they may be spread through that area.
There was probably about 50 people between everybody in the search party. And of course, cadaver dogs.
But they found nothing. We did a canvass and started questioning everyone in that local area.
And that's when Jay Grabner showed up. Jay lived across the street from where the head was found. The day of the search, Jay came down out of his house, came up to some of us while we were at the search. We were able to talk to him and get him to come in and do an interview with us.
The crows were screaming in the woods right across from the house, right where the creek is, where the spring starts. I said, if you look down there or something, there's some kind of disturbance there.
He was interested in the discovery of the head. He was interested in the person who had found it.
To me, this situation is just too convenient and too pretty for a kid to come up on this.
He was looking to pin this on this 15-year-old boy who discovered the head.
I'm not saying he didn't, but I'm just saying it was too conveniently placed that it wanted to be found.
Jay wanted to be the center of attention. He was that person that had to be listened to or has to be heard. He came off with some really odd statements.
So it makes sense that he would kill somebody, dismember them, then put the head there, and then call us.
I would say that's a scenario.
For what?
I really don't recall Jay providing anything useful other than his own statements. We never really were able to get really, really good, useful information out of Jay. And of course, we did talk to the 15-year-old boy.
Tell me what you find. I found a human head. Okay.
I watched the detectives who interviewed the 15-year-old who found the head, and he wasn't evasive in any which way. He was open.
Okay. Did you tell anybody else? I told my grandma. Okay. Did you text anybody? No.
He was very forthcoming when we talked to him. Once we got his story, it just rang true.
We did talk to a lot of neighbors about him. We very quickly were able to determine that he didn't really have much to do with this, other than the fact that he found it. My question is, who does something like this? Where's the rest of her body? I don't think anybody deserves to have a body part cut away from them and thrown into the woods and left there to lay the way this person was.
One of the first things we tried to do was get DNA so we could identify and try to match up the head was someone, some family member.
We have teeth samples, hair, brain, skin.
If we got the DNA sample and we enter it into Ancestry to find some relative, find out where she came from, that would help us determine how this whole thing took place.
We send a sample of the occipital bone to North Texas University for DNA.
Nothing.
We sent brain samples, tissue samples, hair to the FBI to help us determine that identity.
Nothing.
We have actually, over the course of time here, made probably 5, 6 attempts at DNA.
And each time, we got nothing. They cannot give us a DNA profile, and we have no DNA to go with.
What we eventually found out was the embalming fluid actually deteriorates the DNA from that sample, and have yet to be able to get any type of DNA markers to even begin to do any type of comparison or match. At that point in the investigation, Andy and I started to discuss the idea that we wanted to get some sort of a likeness out to the public in hopes that somebody could identify her. We didn't want to release an actual photo, so we started to look at the idea of a forensic artist.
I generally get a call when somebody is at the end of their rope. It's a little bit of a Hail Mary pass to come and get a forensic artist. There were certain things about Jane Doe's head that were very recognizable. She had a perm, she had a certain hair color. She had 2 distinct moles, very small, but they were very distinct moles on her left cheek. I felt that she was possibly a smoker because of the lines around her mouth and a little bit of the coloration of her teeth, but mostly that thing that people do with their mouths when they're drawing from a cigarette.
My thoughts were, once we make this drawing public, we would be getting several calls.
They released a sketch of what the woman might have looked like. They do not know how long ago she may have died or why.
Turned out we weren't really getting anywhere with that. This woman's identity has been taken away from her, and we are just unable at this time to figure out who that person is.
They came back to me and asked for a sculpture. It takes more time to make one, but it can be very useful because some of us are more recognizable from other views. So if you have a dominant feature in a profile, that wouldn't show up in a front view. I try to maintain some kind of a sense of that individual as a human. I feel as though I'm doing my part to bury the dead. We want to identify her. If a person died on the side of the road, they're not just left there for the birds to pick at, right? But that's what happened to our Jane Doe. She was just on the side of the road. It's something that has to be rectified, and that's literally what I'm trying to do, what Chief O'Brien is trying to do, what Andy's trying to do.
It has now been 1 month since a human head was found along a road, and there are still very few answers.
They released a 3D model. I want you to take a look at this. Please emphasize that this is a clay reconstruction that is considered a family likeness. It is not exact.
I was reporting on the case when they hired the artist to create her likeness. The sculpture did generate some chatter, and some people did call in.
We followed up on every phone call, every lead that came in. I'm not a betting man, but I told Chief O'Brien, we were going to get a call that a mausoleum was broken into or a grave was dug up.
And we did, in fact, get a lead from the corner in Fayette County, which is just south of us here, about 90 minutes away from Economy Borough. The coroner tells us about a crypt that was broken into, casket pulled from the wall, and the head missing from the body of the person inside that casket. Okay, they got a body without a head, we got a head without a body. This has got to be it.
On August 4th, 1988, I responded to a call at the Teresa DiCarlo crypt. Teresa DiCarlo was a local lady. She passed away in the very early 1950s. We discovered her crypt had been broken into. The rear window in the back of the crypt had been smashed. When we looked into the coffin, the glass liner was smashed and Teresa DiCarlo's head was missing. From what I could tell, the tools used to decapitate the head would have been a sharp instrument, possibly a sharp knife. We made a thorough search of the cemetery to see if they discarded her head somewhere nearby. We did not find it, and we did not find any other desecrations. This is the crypt of the DiCarlo family. If it was a classic theft, we would expect them to have taken gold watches and rings. We found out they neglected to take the jewelry. You're going to go to all that trouble. Why would you not take the valuables? In my mind, it was absolutely a satanic crime. At that time, we had an active satanic cult in this area. We had calls, complaints that there was satanic activity out at the Dunbar Cave. It's only about 15, 20 minutes from the cemetery where Teresa DiCarlo's head was stolen. This cave is the scene where a lot of satanic activity occurred during the late 1980s and the early 1990s. They had sacrifices and parties there, rituals. Now the key thing, the most prized possession of a satanic cult was to have a human head. That's what they wanted, and that's what they're looking for. After I retired, I saw an article in the newspaper about Economy Borough having an unidentified head. So my natural instinct was to see if maybe they had our head.
It was certainly an interesting case that fit our case.
We had compared Jane Doe's photograph against the photographs that were supplied to us of Teresa DiCarlo.
Comparing them to Jane Doe, there were some similarities, some resemblance.
They were both white females. Teresa DiCarlo was 75 years old when she passed away. The estimate on our head was between 60 and 80 years old, which matched it. Our forensic pathologist and our coroner wanted us to look at this very hard. Now, we needed some clear way to match Teresa DiCarlo with our Jane Doe.
My team and I were brought in to determine if the head that was discovered in 2014 was a match to the body that was in the mausoleum from 1952. The first thing we noticed was she had a lot of dentistry done over a number of years. There were large tooth-colored fillings in the front of the mouth. What we found is that the fillings were made of something called barium glass. Barium glass products are fairly common, but this is modern dentistry. These techniques were not possible back in 1952 because those materials simply did not exist back then.
The head had had dental work done in the 80s and 90s, and Teresa DiCarlo had died in 1952. We determined they could not be a match.
And we're back to square one.
Some police officers that I work with, the ones who want to compliment me, tell me I'm relentless. The other ones who don't want to compliment me tell me I'm a pain in the butt. And that's because I want every T crossed and every I dotted. And I want every case, even if there's no arrest, to have an answer. Everybody has to have a name. She should have one besides Jane Doe.
Over the course of this investigation, one of the questions that we continuously brought up was, at what point do you have the opportunity to sever a head from a body? Knowing that she was embalmed, that tells us that she most likely was prepared for a funeral.
So was a body somehow tampered with between leaving the funeral home and being cremated or being buried?
There's the option of visitation or a viewing with cremation, where the body is prepared and embalmed as it would be for a regular visitation, but instead of going to a cemetery afterwards, the body's then taken to the crematory.
We found out that a body could possibly lay in a funeral home for several days before it reaches the crematory. Could somebody pick a body up at a funeral home and be able to have the time to do these things on the way to a crematory? Absolutely, they could.
We found that there are funeral directors in this country that were selling body parts. That took the investigation down a whole new path.
I would like to think in my heart ethically that 100% of funeral directors are legitimate and they do the right things. But you never know what happens. The dark side of this is that there's people that do a lot of bad things. I feel that it's possible that Jane Doe could be part of maybe like a black market deal. This had to be something that was underground.
Tonight, claims of secretly dismembering and selling body parts in the hours after a death.
We have talked to more than a half dozen families, now victims of what they describe as a scheme to profit from their pain.
We ended up getting in touch with a reporter. He's doing this research on the black market body trade and wants to, feature our Jane Doe as part of his research.
When I started looking at this story, the question was, did Jane Doe's head come from a body broker? Was it part of the body trade? I was working on a story about people who were making a living off illegal sales of body parts, and there were basically no checks and balances on them. It differs substantially from the concept that more people are familiar with, which is organ transplantation. There are many laws that deal with how that is to be done. But with body brokers, there are literally chop shops where they would harvest body parts. They would cut it up and they would sell it, often for research purposes, to others. And one of the things that we noted was that there were conferences at hotels where the ballroom was rented out, and they would have on hand body parts, human heads, other parts of the bodies, for the people there to see and work on for demonstrations.
Torsos for $1,000, a pelvis with upper legs for $1,200, heads went for $500, and $250 for a knee.
The idea that body brokers were selling a human head for $500, and this one shows up in a field, and there was no clarity as to how she got there or who she was. It gave me some pause. In order to tell an effective story and to understand where that head was found, we went out to the scene. And as soon as we stopped there, a man came out of the house across the street, and that was Jay Grabner.
That head was not thrown down there. That head was placed there. It was too convenient.
He was, I guess, a busybody. He was the neighbor who would insert himself into situations. I was struck by how eager Jay was to seem to help. He had his own theories. One of his theories was that a teenager, the one who found the head in the woods, was behind this and called 911 to alert the police about it. And I thought to myself, a 15-year-old boy getting a hold of a human head, placing it in the woods, finding it himself, calling 911. It seemed inconceivable to me. Where would he get it?
You know, you don't remember anything until you review it. And then when you review it, small fine points come up. I believe there's like 3 sections to this case.
Okay, let's start with one then. Let's start with one.
Well, okay. The question is my relationship with the kid.
Yeah.
It came with a horse.
What we learned was that Jay had been friends with that teenage boy for years.
They had a friendship together where he tried to, mentor and teach him things like that.
And I said, I talked about baseball. He'd come over and sit on my truck tailgate and talk about things. And he asked me if I'd come over and show him how to hit. I said, I'll come down with your grandfather and we'll pitch baseball. And I'll show you how to stand and swing the bat, stuff like that. He asked me about
And then they had a falling out. And for whatever reason, it caused a breakup between the two of them. And Jay no longer allowed the 15-year-old boy to come to Jay's house and property anymore.
Did he ever threaten you at all?
I told him I don't want you coming in this house ever again.
What happened after that is there was a horse that lived across the road that belonged to the people that owned the property. And Jay took a liking to it and sort of considered it his horse, Ginger.
This is the barn that she used to come in and out of all the time. And she'd go up in the 45 acres up there, and she'd go over.
It's hard to say what happened to Ginger. One day, they found her bleeding in the field. They called a veterinarian, and Jay says the veterinarian said, Ginger has been stabbed. The horse lived for a few more weeks and then succumbed to the injuries. And for Jay, that was tantamount to murder.
Rest in peace, Ginger. And I really love her a lot. And I miss her terribly. I really do. We used to play.
Jay thought that that teenage boy had stabbed and murdered the horse.
Jay believed that the 15-year-old killed Ginger because of the falling out and the fact that he was no longer allowed to come to Jay's property.
We interviewed people who said that in the months after, Jay talked about revenge, revenge, revenge. What form that would take, people didn't know what to think.
So now we have an issue between the person who finds this head and another man whose house is the only house that's very, very close to where the head was found. Something wasn't right.
One of the other things that surprised me initially with Jay was his knowledge about the body trade industry. What's your theory?
I don't know. I told him that I thought there was events, and I was the first one to bring it up, that they do seminars at some of these hotels and stuff like that, where they put plastic on the floor and they cut, then they experiment and take eyes and legs and arms and whatever, hearts, kidneys or whatever. So
he knew that there were these conferences in hotels. And he also knew, he said, that sometimes body parts would just be thrown in a dumpster. And it always surprised me that he knew that. I hadn't known it, and I'd done a lot of research at the outset. But Jay knew it, and I always wondered why. It fundamentally changed how I thought about his possible involvement, that Jay did have something to do with placing that head there. I joked with Jay at the beginning. I said, "You see everything that takes place on this street, don't you?" He said, "Just about." He gave me a tour of the house. In part of the house, there was a telescope. We sent down one of our cameramen, And I said, go to the spot where the head was found. The telescope was pointed toward that area. You could see him through the telescope from that window.
It's the only spot on the road where that the head could be seen from the road, but also from the house, from the window. Yes, I totally agree with that.
Part of me thought Jay put that head there in the field, and Jay had a telescope set up to see that spot. He was watching, and he got to see how it played out. So if you look at this map, that's the road where the house Jay was living is along. It's right around here. The head is found over here, and that spot has another piece of significance that involves Jay. It's mere feet from where his horse, Ginger, was injured. She was later buried by Jay right about here. So if you think about why this spot, it's the spot that Jay associates with what he believed was the murder of his friend, Ginger. On that day, I think that boy was doing exactly what he'd done on many other days, which was walking through that field. And that's how he spotted the head. And Jay knew that boy would come across it, and I think that's what Jay was banking on.
This continued to make me concerned about Jay and what his involvement was.
As I continued to visit Jay, I wanted to see if I could get deeper. And one of the areas that I broached with him was, would you be willing to take a polygraph test? Would you go in and take a polygraph test for them?
Fucking right.
You would?
You're fucking right, I would. Them motherfuckers think I did that, had anything to do with that head? I'll do it tomorrow. Go get the damn thing set up. I'll do it tomorrow. You don't think I'm serious about getting this solved?
He was very insistent. And so we arranged with one of the state's best polygraph examiners to do this. We came up with 3 primary questions to ask him. Did you place that severed head in that field? His answer was no. Regarding that severed head found across from your house, did you place that there? His answer was no. Did you plan with anyone to place that severed head in that field? His answer was no. In each case, deception was indicated, and by deception, a 99.9% chance that he was not telling the truth. It's not like we're a little bit unsure. It's you were lying. Minutes after he finished, we sat down with Jay to explain the results.
So how do you think this makes you look?
I don't care how it makes me look, because I'm telling the truth. I know nothing about the head, where it came from, or who cooked up the idea to do that head. I'm dead straight honest, period. I'm not built no other way.
I believe that Jay knows how that head got there. I think it almost became a cat and mouse game for Jay, where he's going to put a little bit out there and see what we do with it.
Every time I spoke with Jay, there would be some other element that would stop me in my tracks. I had heard rumors that the head may have been connected to Jay in some way. Someone mentioned, could it have been his mother? And matter-of-factly, he told me about the fact that he had lost his best friend, his dog Jackie. And he pointed to a standalone freezer in the basement of the house and said, she's in there, double bagged, freeze-dried. Could that freezer have held a human head? Yes, it could have.
This was my mother, 1939.
We knew that Jay's mother had passed away 15 years before the head was found. So we followed that as best we could, checked her grave, We checked with the funeral home. We checked to see if there was any possibility of any tampering with it before the casket was buried. And we even double checked with family members. We have a couple pictures of Jay's mom, showed them to the experts, and they don't feel it matches. But I was certainly still looking at the possibility that Jay Grabner is somehow involved in this.
I think Jay definitely knows a lot more than we were able to find out from him.
In 2020, we got a call from the Ohio Highway Patrol. Jay Grabner drove his pickup truck on the Ohio Turnpike, pulled up along an overpass. There is a truck on the turnpike heading towards that overpass, and Jay jumps off the overpass in front of the truck.
I don't doubt that there were some sort of mental health issues that he struggled with. What they were, I don't know. It surprised me, though. It saddened me a lot.
Jay Grabner commits suicide. My best lead is gone. He was the last string I had in solving this case.
If Jay were responsible for putting that head in that field, that solves only one element of this mystery. The other mystery, which I think is arguably more important, is who is she? Who is she?
A burial service is set after a woman's embalmed head was found in the woods in western Pennsylvania. The Beaver County coroner and police are still working to identify the woman. The remains will be buried at a Beaver County cemetery tomorrow.
On the anniversary of her discovery, we had decided to do a funeral service. It was attended by most of us that were involved in the case and our wives or loved ones, and it was sad. The coroner was able to put her in a full-size casket so that when the rest of her is found, she can be reunited as whole. And she has a headstone there that reads Jane Doe.
All the investigators in the case wanted to make sure that she had a proper burial. It was almost a bit of a public promise that they wouldn't forget about it and that they would keep working for answers for her.
The hardest thing about this case is knowing that somebody out there doesn't even know that their loved one is the person who we're looking to identify. What do we know about Jane Doe? We know she's a female, probably in her 60s or older. We don't have her DNA. We don't know how she got there.
She deserves to have everyone know who she really is. She deserves to be buried with a headstone with her name on it. No one should be buried as a Jane Doe.
In 50 years, I've solved most of the stuff I investigate. There are only a handful that I've been involved in that I don't know the answer. I don't know who put the head there. I don't know who the lady is. I don't know why she has red rubber balls where her eyes should be. That's a lot of I don't knows. This has become something I can't let go. Almost everybody else in that cemetery has someone who comes and mourns. who comes and mourns her?
In this case, there is indeed a commander, an executor, and an accomplice. The three of them shot each other and everyone ended up in front of the Montpellier police. Who killed Bernadette Bissonnette? We know it now, but we have never discovered why. In the suburb of Montpellier, Castelnau-le-Lait, a quiet residential neighborhood, even a little quiet. This evening of March 11th, 2008, it is 10 p.m. when the gendarmerie receives a desperate call. Gendarmerie, I'm listening. We hear a madman crying, who doesn't understand, who shouts, why you, who loves his wife. We really hear a man completely terrified. This madman is called Jean-Michel Bissonnette, and he lives in one of the villas of the neighborhood a few streets away. At the entrance of the house, the gendarmes discover a crime scene. There was Mrs. Bissonnette's body inside the entrance hall. She was lying on the floor on her back, with blood around her body. Nearby, there was a serpent, which Mr. Bissonnette told us was the one who left to get close to his wife. The husband is in shock. He says, above all, it's awful, it's awful. He wants to know what we're going to do, what we're not going to do. His wife is dead. He says, they killed her. The gendarmes then question Mr. Bissonnette. This March 11th, 2008, like every Tuesday, he was at the Montpellier the last time he spoke to his wife. It was on the phone, on the way. He tells me he left around 7:40 p.m., that he went to his Rotary meeting with his car, as he usually does every Tuesday night, and that on the way, he notices that behind his car, on the back seat, there's his dog. He calls his wife to tell her, I have the dog with me, don't worry, I have the dog with me. The Rotary meeting ends 2 hours later. It's almost 10 p.m. when Jean-Michel Bissonnette comes home. As usual, the dog runs towards the front door. But then, strangely, he lies down, shaking. Jean-Michel Bissonnette opens the door. I ask him for the first information to ask him if he had an idea of the person who could have done this, if he knew of any other enemies. At no time does he mention any person. No, he doesn't know at all. He thinks it was a cameraman who made a mistake. Castelnau is a chic neighborhood. Robberies have increased in recent years. The Bissonnettes were also victims 2 years earlier. Mr. Bissonnette tells us a little later that he notices that his wife's 4x4 vehicle, a RAV4, was stolen. And that's when we start a search for this vehicle. The Bissonnette village is one of the most beautiful in the neighborhood. Enough to amaze the convoy. The property is huge. We access it through a portal which is automatic, with a large avenue. We are on a land that is about between 4,500 and 5,000 square meters, and a 2-story house of about 20 rooms. It is a very beautiful villa with an indoor pool, a small gem for Mrs. Julien, the wife of Mr. Bissonnette, the victims. It was one of the few times where I was able to intervene on such a beautiful house. Jean-Michel Bissonnette is a rich Montpellier retiree. Until now, he led a quiet life with his wife Bernadette, a former seductive pharmacist whom he always said he was very in love with after 30 years of marriage. At 61 years old, Jean-Michel Bissonnette is a respected notary, as they say. We see that he is part of the high society of Montpellier, especially with the Rotary Club. He is a man of iron. They are retired, they live well, they travel, so everything is going well. While the investigators discuss with the husband in the garden, the technicians in criminal identification, the TIC, have already found the stolen car in just a few streets of the villa. And they immediately spot interesting elements.
There is blood on the indicator and on the front left door. After the car, the gendarmes return to the crime scene, the luxurious villa of 400 square meters. To go around it, they need all night and all day of the next day. The investigators and the TIC note that the attack was violent. The car was perforated in many places. In view of the hunting lead found on the ground, it is easy to guess with which weapon was shot on the old pharmacy. The findings allow us to determine that it was killed with 2 bullets from a rifle that would be a .16 caliber. The first lead bullet had hit the left neck, and a second lead bullet at the right shoulder. In the entrance hall, the technicians notice very quickly traces of blood, erased. The sawdust is right next to it. The investigators tell us that it was Mr. Bissonette who erased this bloodstain. So when we ask him why he erased this bloodstain, he tells us that his dog petted his wife's body. And that's why he locked her in the room on the first floor. But strangely, the stains are circular and the TIC finds no trace of dog's paw in the blood. Suddenly, the technicians notice something that intrigues them. We find on the carpet a piece of transparent material that at first looks like plastic. And when we take it and grab it, we realize it's a nail. An important nail in size. We're not talking about a nail of an ear, but of a thumb. And all the small pieces that we find on the floor and on the ceiling remind us of a finger. A finger. On the ceiling. But Bernadette's hands are intact. The killer probably got hurt by shooting. The first conclusion we come up with is that these people didn't kill her with weapon. For us, this case is partially solved because we have enough material from the pieces of stuff that we could pick up. A few meters further, there are still clues to this point. All along the staircase, drops of blood go up to a room on the floor, on the left side. On the same side as the traces of blood found in the car. This confirms to us that the author of the facts, or at least the person who used the car, was injured on the left side. But what did the killer come to do on the floor, since he apparently didn't steal anything? Neither the jewelry of Madame, nor the camera of Monsieur. Nothing was stolen in his house. It's a house with works of art, with silverware, with liquid money, which was only in the bag of Madame Juhan, the victim. Nothing was touched, so the theft was dismissed. Chief Assistant Jennings, you are head of investigation on this case. When you go on the crime scene, what do you notice? There is no disorder in the residence. There is no sign of theft, no object is stolen. There is no sign of struggle. Madame Bissonnet does not seem to have fought her attacker. The entrance door to this hall. There is no breach. The portal has no breach. We ask ourselves the question, if Mrs. Bissonnet did not open her door in all tranquility, knowing her assailant. What impression does Jean-Michel Bissonnet's husband make on you? We really see him on the day of the search. And there, we realize that we have a person who presents us with 2 personalities. He stands out when he discovers that we have masked the traces of his wife's blood with a blanket, which implies to us that he has a certain value and that a few weeks ago, he had taken her to the cleaning. There, he is in a rage. Then, we discover in the closet of the furniture, entering a buffet, that there is 18,000 euros. So there, he is all agitated. He goes from a nervous breakdown to euphoria. He cries at some point, but it's always tears that dry up. He is really weird. Very, very, very weird. The police convict Jean-Michel Bissonnet the day after the crime for a more in-depth hearing. On Wednesday, March 12th, early afternoon, Jean-Michel Bissonnet arrives at the police station. The first shock has passed and he is visibly in a hurry to be heard. What is striking from his arrival is that before Mr. Bissonnet sits in his chair, he starts talking to me right away about an employee. He refers to him as his window cleaner, who is Mr. Belkacem, where he immediately tells me that this gentleman asked him for money. He says, "Here, I don't want to direct the investigation, But here, we have an altercation in the afternoon because he wants to buy a vehicle and he wanted me to make him an advance of 5,000 euros. I refused. He left, unhappy. Faced with him, the two investigators are a little taken aback by his unexpected suspicions about the window cleaner. When the day before, Jean-Michel Bissonnette told his story on March 11th, he did talk about this employee, Mizien Belkacem, but to tell them that it was a man he trusted completely. The window cleaner came to work that morning. His wife left, as usual, to her gym class, and in the afternoon, he received a visit from an old friend before leaving for his meeting at the Rotary. A banal day. I find it very disturbing, to begin with, because he doesn't tell us about it at the first hearing. However, it is still essential to tell us that on this day of March 11th, there was an altercation with Mr. Belkacem. Better late than never. The gendarmes now have a lead, that of the window cleaner, Mizien Belkacem, an interim gardener. Unfortunately, Jean-Michel Bissonnette has erased his mobile phone number. It takes several days for the gendarmes to find his trace and summon him. On March 20th in the morning, Mizien Belkacem therefore presents himself to the gendarmerie. So there he comes with us to the office, and then I find myself just behind him, and there I realize that in fact he has a large leather jacket on him, whose sleeves were overlapped, and we couldn't see his fingers, and we knew that on the spot, the author had been injured. In the small office, Mizien Belkacem keeps his jacket during the audition. He kept his jacket with him during the audition when it was quite hot, and he kept it anyway. So I actually increased the heating a little to make him understand that at some point he had to get comfortable and take off his jacket. He did it, and it was at that moment that he put his hands under his armpits, and I saw that he was injured. At the first sight of his injury on the left thumb, the gendarme stopped the audition and placed Belkacem in custody. I ask him the question, "But are you injured?" And he answers me, "Yes, indeed, I was injured." I put my finger in an alternator belt of a car that was broken and I got hurt. Well, he doesn't say anymore. We felt that Mr. Belkacem was uncomfortable and he didn't tell us the truth. What we did was that we reassured him a lot about his children, his family, and that he had to evaluate what he had on his conscience. And it was at that moment that he confessed to us that he had killed Mrs. Bissonnette. This is the surprise, of course, because we don't have to deal with a killer in front of us. It's really an individual, but lambda. We say to ourselves, but why? He tells us that it was a certain day from the property of Mr. and Mrs. Bissonnette that he would have met two individuals. We are a little bit in the film Men in Black, where we are described two people dressed in black with black glasses who waited Mr. Belkacem at the exit of a hospital a month before and who asked him to kill Mrs. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. We realize very quickly that it doesn't make sense. And there he tells us I killed Mrs. Bissonnette on the recommendation of the husband, Mr. Bissonnette. It's a shock because he designs us the client. It changes the whole of the investigation. Me having had Mr. Bissonnette several times on the phone, I find myself a little surprised. I would never have thought that. Mizien Belkacem explains to them that Jean-Michel Bissonnette offered him 30,000 euros to get rid of his wife. We don't take into account right away what Mizien Belkacem tells us. We make him understand that what he is telling us, the facts are much more serious because it is no longer a voluntary homicide but a murder. For him, in terms of the sentence, he risked much more and that he had no interest in saying something that was not true. Mizien Belkacem persists. He then starts a detailed story of the murder. This evening of March 11th, he obeyed according to his boss's plan. It was planned that he would arrive home around 8 p.m., that he had to go in first using the remote given by Mr. Bissonnette without ringing to get the gun, which was in a garage wrapped in a rag. The gun was hidden under his car. Mizien Belkacem then sneaked to the gate to ring the bell. He runs into Mrs. Bissonnette and tells her, "As I came to work in the afternoon, I forgot my cell phone at home." Mrs. Bissonnette does not hesitate and opens the gate. So he enters the property and Mrs. Bissonnet also enters. He climbs to the floor of the apartment where he searches, and he goes down the same staircase where Mrs. Bissonnet was waiting for him downstairs and arrives practically at the end of the staircase in the last steps. It is there that he tells us to immediately take out his gun and shoot the first shot on her. There he tells us that she protected herself with her arms and that she shouted to her mother. Mrs. Bissonnet falls to the ground. He gets on top of the body, proceeds to the second shot. He will go back to the floor, always on the directive of Mr. Bissonnet, to make sure by going to the window of one of the rooms that no neighbor, no light was on. Mazie-Ann Belkacem specifies that it was at this moment that he felt a pain in the thumb and he realized that he had injured himself by shooting. When he took out his gun to shoot, as he had his finger right next to the exit of the barrel, and by shooting the first shot there is a piece of material of the thumb that is gone. He sees that drops of blood are on the ground and it's his blood. He tells us that he partially wiped the traces of blood on the ground. Mr. Bissonnet would have asked him to throw objects back to make it look like a robbery, but he didn't do it because he was terrified. He decided to leave his plan. He took the 4x4 of Mrs. Bissonnet to park it at the right place in a street a little lower. Then he tells us to have left the murder weapon always on the directive of Mr. Bissonnet in front of the passenger seat before on the Toyota RAV4, to have taken his vehicle and to have entered a room that he had in a car. Belkacem claims that he left the weapon clearly on the seat, but during the investigations the police didn't find it. It's the only point that clashes in his story. For the rest, the allegations are long and precise. But during the custody, Belkacem will bring an element that will reinforce his version. After several hours of custody, the investigators start to take Mr. Belkacem by surprise, until in a banal discussion with Mr. Gorseau, who asks Belkacem a question saying that he wasn't afraid of the dog. And there, spontaneously, Mr. Belkacem says, "I knew the dog wouldn't be there because Mr. Bissonnet told me that he would take him with him during his meeting at the Rotary Club." So there's a split. We say to ourselves, how can Mr. Belkacem know these details given that these details are only known by Bissonnet and no one else? So we stop the custody. Belkacem discusses with these three investigators, and then, 5 minutes later, they come back to see me at the office and say Belkacem is telling the truth. The other dog is in the flower. That's when we start to have doubts about Bissonnet's personality and his statements. To ensure Belkacem's credibility, the police contact his relatives to find out who they are dealing with. Because Belkacem is unknown to the police. He was born in Algeria. He is 49 years old. He is illiterate and without a diploma. He is described by everyone as a good guy, a hard worker. But the carpenter often has a hard time keeping his end of the month. He is in a very fragile period because he is separated from his wife. He rarely sees his children, so I think it's a bad period that Mr. Belkacem is going through. In early 2008, Belkacem is multiplying his small jobs. He is a seasonal farmer, a gardener. In recent years, he has also become a carpenter, nicknamed Bissonnet. 400 square meters of concrete is 3 days of work. Belkacem describes his boss as a good man. "God gave me the gift to put him on my path," he says. Belkacem is angry with Mr. Bissonnet. He speaks of him as someone who has succeeded in life, from home, from his financial position. He tells me, "I have a black foot, in Montpellier, like that, he gives me work," and he admired him, because he tells me, "You have to see how he succeeded in his life, offices, money, bank accounts." Belkacem tells the police that for several months, his boss wanted to get rid of a person who bothered him. He offered 30,000 euros to the one who would help him. We are going to question his ex-wife, and she tells us that she remembers very well that one evening, when Mazie-Ann came home after the work of the Bissonnet family. He had explained to her that he was looking for someone to get rid of, maybe someone else. 30,000 euros, it's huge, it's 2 years of work, it's more than he ever had of money. On the morning of March 11th, Bissonnet tells her that the person he wants to get rid of is his wife, and it's for tonight. A difficult opportunity to refuse for the gardener who pulls the devil by the tail. And his boss looks so unhappy. What he will tell us in his statement is that Mr. Bissonnet hurts him at times, to hear him say that his wife presses him, that she prevents him from living. So there was Mr. Bissonnet at that time who was going to see him and who was always complaining, saying, "It's not okay, I can't stand my wife anymore." Jean-Michel Bissonnet would have told him that if he divorced, he would lose everything, even his house. He also tried to reassure him to tell him, "Don't be afraid, no one can find you. And when they come to accuse you, I would say that you can't do anything about it." The more the police advance, the more the gendarmes find that the story of Belkacem sounds right. The portrait his relatives make of him confirms this impression. They describe him as a very helpful person, kind, not very cunning, but of goodwill, always at the service level. On the other hand, we are described as someone that we have to lead. That is to say that if we have to move a particular tool, we must explain to him why and where to move it. It is not someone who will take initiatives. The simplicity, the frustrated side of Mizien Belkacem pleads for him. We quickly understand that Mr. Belkacem cannot invent what he has just put in front of us. It is impossible. So, inevitably, the case is overturned. That is to say that we are really going to focus now on Mr. Bissonnet. On March 21st, 2008, Jean-Michel Bissonnet is interpelled at 7:50 a.m., very precisely. He is placed in custody in an office right next to the one where Mizien Belkacem is interrogated. We explain to Mr. Bissonnet that if he is in custody and if he is interrogated in this way, it is because a person is recognized being the author of this murder. And there, strangely, instead of telling us if you have the author or what, spontaneously, he will tell us if you have an author, and if I am in custody, it is because he accuses me of being the commander. Which is still very special to think that you can be the commander. The gendarmes then announced to him that the one who confessed and designated him as the commander is none other than Mizien Belkacem, his carpenter. And there, Mr. Bissonnet does not want to believe us. He tells us, "But no, this is not Mr. Belkacem." And there, we are almost obliged to show him the paragraph where Mr. Belkacem made this revelation. To tell him, "You see, it's well written." Well, let's say he's the one to praise him, to tell us, but it's not possible. He denies everything. And when my colleagues go into the details of the questions that will bother him, well, he will say, "I don't know." Belkacem accuses him? Bissonnet does not understand. As for telling his life as a couple to his employee, for whom do we take it? They get along wonderfully. They travel because they are madly in love with each other. In love. Precisely. The investigators placed the house of the Bissonnets on the list the day after the crime. And this is what they intercept during a call to his cousin. "Hello, Jean-Michel?" "Yes, it's Jaco." He had a conversation explaining that his wife was a pain in the ass. "Bernadette, she is unforgettable. She pissed me off so much that she is unforgettable. From the beginning, you tell us an idyllic story with your wife, but there, it was a little big." And Mr. Bissonnet quickly fell back on his feet, saying that his wife was not a pain in the ass. I said that because it's an everyday life as she wanted, but I put it like that. The watch is extended. On March 22nd, the investigators organize a confrontation between Jean-Michel Bissonnet and Mizien Belkacem. We are several investigators in the room, and there we all had the same feeling. It is that Mr. Belkacem continued to give the same answers, was straight in his sneakers, did not tremble in what he said. And we had, on the other hand, Mr. Bissonnet next to him who was really hot, who was embarrassed, who says that Mr. Belkacem is a liar. It was at that moment that we felt all the admiration that Mr. Belkacem could have collapsed vis-a-vis Mr. Bissonnette because he saw that he had been completely let go. He did not support him anymore. He told us that he was a scoundrel. He told me that he would protect me, and in fact, he does not defend me. The watch is ending. The gendarmes are now convinced of the guilt of Jean-Michel Bissonnette. I think it's been a while that he knows how this watch is going to end. He sees it coming. That's why he's trying to convince me one last time by telling me, "But Mr. Riculi, you know I'm innocent." I told him, "Mr. Bissonnette, you know that I think otherwise." At the end of their watch, the two men are presented to the judge of instruction. Mizian Belkacem is put on trial for murder, Jean-Michel Bissonnette for complicity of murder. Both are executed. The news of the incarceration of Jean-Michel Bissonnette goes around Montpellier. In the entourage of the Bissonnettes, it is the incredulity. Jean-Michel killed his impossible Bernadette. The most absurd are Marc and Florent, the sons of the Bissonnette couple. We find few couples who, even after 30 years of marriage, remain stuck to each other every evening, every lunch, every dinner. Here they were. They were more than that, they were demonstrative. And Dad worked for 30 years to realize Mom's project. But with a crazy desire. And it's because he wanted to please her. He was in love with her, Mom was in love with him. The two brothers then contact the lawyer Jean-Marc Darrigade. The charges at that time are of a disconcerting lightness. I have the conviction that this man, in any case, he is incarcerated wrongly. And there are the simple statements of a gardener at this time, which are declared ipso facto coherent. Even though from that moment on, they are not coherent at all. And it seems to me, if you will, already completely stunning. As for the phone call during which Jean-Michel Bissonnette called his wife a troublemaker, it's a wrong conversation, according to the lawyer. In this conversation, a few sentences above, he says to the same jackwad, "But we had prepared the house, I had cut the trees, everything was organized for the arrival of the grandchildren. And now I'm like an idiot." The gendarmes are going to throw themselves on this conversation, take it out of its context. This qualification of a troublemaker delivered a few days after the crime is necessarily the signature of someone who wanted to kill his wife. Spontaneously, Jean-Michel Bissonnette's relatives get together around their old friend. Jean-Michel Bissonnette, in his prison, he was above and below. He was desperate, screaming his innocence, someone on the verge of suicide. This is where we tried to structure a support committee knowing that there were people outside who thought it was necessary to do the truth. And very quickly, several hundred people on April 4th, 2008, Bissonnette's sons and about 20 members of the support committee settled in the corridors of the Justice Palace in Montpellier. The delegation had a hard time staying calm. Paul, try not to make any noise, please. The request for release is examined in a public hearing. Lower your hand, lower your hand. You're innocent, Dad. In the meantime, friends, family, colleagues take their pen. Madam, the judge of instruction, very touched by the horror that destroys the life of my friend, I would like to bring to your knowledge the sweetness that reigned in my eyes in the couple of Bernadette and Jean-Michel. The letters follow each other, but do not affect the judge. The request for release is rejected. Florent Bissonnette, you are the son of Jean-Michel Bissonnette, and from the start, you did not understand this trial. No, especially since he was incarcerated 10 days after my mother's death. And for us, it was a shock because we were expecting everything except that. And we didn't understand. And the justifications that were given to us did not convince us. When you don't know much about justice, you think there must be evidence or concrete elements. And there, the only things there were the accusations that seemed to us, at the time, crazy from Musée de Belkacem. And that's all. And it is in the nature of your father to call on a gardener, if he had something to do like that, to kill his wife? The problem is that we didn't even ask ourselves that question. We just said that my father didn't want to have my mother killed. It was the basis. We knew our parents for years and everything was fine. For the gendarmes, Jean-Michel Bissonnette is the client. But he lacks evidence and a motive. He was born in 1947 in Oran, Algeria, in a modest family. At 21, he meets a pretty pharmacist, Bernadette. He marries her in 1978. With his support, he starts in real estate. It's the jackpot. He makes a fortune. 20 years later, he sells everything to enjoy life with Bernadette. The problems of the couple, invoked by Mizi and Belkacem, do not resist the first exams. We quickly realize that one and the other have no lover, do not have a double life, that they love each other. No past or present extramarital relationship, so nothing that could make us feel that there was really a problem in the couple. Everything is fine. Yet during the auditions, Jean-Michel Bissonnette's deplorable wife attitude sounds wrong. Tears without tears, a whole game like that, but which allows him to always calculate where we are going. And when he has the right solution, the tears stop and immediately he raises his head to answer the question. An impression of simulation that the psychologist Rosalind Tessier confirms after meeting Jean-Michel Bissonnette in prison. He is someone who goes from laughing to tears. He is someone, in a very abrupt way, who goes from degeneration to jubilation. Who goes from one subject to another. So the gendarmes do not leave the trail of Bissonnette. If the mobile is not marital, it may be financial. Does the husband have an interest in the death of his wife? Madame Bissonnette is rich by his family and by his work. With his sense of business, he also has his own fortune. And they have a common fortune together since they are under the regime of separation of goods. So really no financial mobile, except for this house which he loves above all. Moreover, he says it very clearly, his house is his paradise. If he divorces his wife, well, there will be a battle to know who will recover the house. So the divorce, it can't be possible. So possibly deleted. The house is a mobile. Still, there must be divorce in the air. The investigators turn around. Master Marshal, you are one of the lawyers of Jean-Michel Bissonnette in this case. The gendarmes can't find a mobile. They decided because Jean-Michel Bissonnette has a very strong personality. Jean-Michel Bissonnette, invading, among other things. He is the big bourgeois. Never forget that Jean-Michel Bissonnette is a rich man. And this rich man, behaving like that, some will say he cries without tears. We make him the ideal culprit and we designate him as such. At the moment he is put on trial, Jean-Michel Bissonnette has against him the accusatory statements of the one who is presented as his gardener, Mr. Belkacem. At that moment, there is nothing. All the friends of the couple agree to say that these are people who can be, in their functioning, shown as an example, as a real success. But they never talked about divorce. So we say, the house. Because if they divorce, they will not be able to keep this house, which is the house of their dreams. They have such a fortune that even by sharing up to the end of the last piece of sheet, everyone will have a sufficiently large share to allow them not only to keep the house, if it was their wish, but to live until the end of their days and perhaps to start a new life, if history wanted it to be that way and to be possible. We must stop. What is the interest of Belkacem in denouncing your client? For Belkacem, responding to the questions of the investigators and to the suggestions of the investigator, he will immediately feel the profit he can draw from this position of the weakest, crushed by the strongest. And that's what he's going to do until the end. The gendarmes know that they are missing an essential element. The famous weapon that Belkacem would have left in the car. It has never been found. Would someone have recovered it? They go through and review the use of the time of March 11th. They remember that Jean-Michel Bissonnette had a visit that day. They have known each other for 41 years. We really feel a very strong friendship between the two of them. Maybe even limit affiliation. The day of the murder, Amaury Darcourt was just passing by Montpellier to see his friend Bissonnette. They went together to buy a polo jacket for the Vicomte. Around 7 p.m., while Jean-Michel Bissonnette was leaving Tourterre Club, Darcourt went to sleep at a friend's house in Saint-Clement-les-Rivières. Interrogated, he tells the gendarmes an anecdote that intrigues them. When he returns to Saint-Clement-les-Rivières, he realizes that he has forgotten his polo jacket. And around 9 p.m., 9:15 p.m., he goes back to Mrs. Bissonnette to get his polo jacket. When he arrives, he tells us that he does not see the light, that he rang several times, 3 times, and that no one answered. So he goes back, he saw nothing, and he heard nothing. Darcourt would have found himself at the doorstep of the Bissonnettes just at the time of the crime. A sacred coincidence. During meetings with all the investigators, one of the investigators says, to laugh, "Hey, wouldn't that be Mr. Amaury Darcourt?" So everyone laughs, including me. Because Amaury Darcourt is an atypical man, a Vicomte, a real one. So we sometimes live at the Château de Saint-Euzoge, sometimes in a large Parisian apartment on Rue Saint-Dominique in the Quartier des Ministers. We see each other in the family. We are fervent Catholics. He was 19 years old. At the age of 19, in 1944, he went to the Resistance. A year later, he joined the Tassigny-Choc Battalion. In 1945, he was seriously injured in Alsace by a bullet blast. He was demobilized in 1947. And that's where the African adventure begins. And there, he will torture death. He will catch a mysterious evil. He receives the extreme auction of a priest. And it is an African shaman who saves his life by administering a mysterious potion to him. Then, he goes to Algeria, where he sets up a music production company. And then, he leaves Algeria because he is forced, like others. And he will return to France. He will marry 3 times. He loves women, not just the one he marries. That's a bit of his problem too. He is a man who seduces, who loves, pleases. He will have a child, an only daughter, Diane, with his first wife. And the red thread of Amaury de Harcourt's life, Frederick, is hunting. He hunts in Africa. He hunts in France. He organizes sumptuous hunts in Saint-Euzoge, on the domain of Saint-Euzoge. He receives personalities. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing hunts there. That's how, no doubt, he became Amaury de Harcourt, presidential hunting advisor. He did everything in his life. And the one who speaks of him the best is his nephew, the Marquis Jean de Harcourt. A detail makes the gendarmes tick. The time of day matters. On the night of the crime, it took him an hour to go get his polo jacket, forgotten by the Bissonnettes. We timed Castelnau Saint Clement. And even with all the fires, we put half an hour maximum. So he would have had time to take the weapon following the murder of Mrs. Bissonnette and to make it disappear, to throw it away. The Vicomte lands are 800 kilometers from Montpellier, in Lyon, at the Château de Saint-Augy, near Blenaude. The gendarmes make several visits to the Vicomte in order to destabilize him. To add a little pressure to him, we go to Blenaude, and this time, we're not going to question him. We're going to question everyone except him. And then we're going to leave. And in the hearings, we obviously feel that it bothers him. The more the days go by, the more we deal with a Mr. Darcourt who is more and more embarrassed in his daily life. We're going to feel through the hearings that he's not sleeping, that he's stressed, that he's not doing well. He's a man who's a believer, moreover. And we obviously feel that there's something bothering him. On Monday, May 5th, 2008, the gendarmes decide that they've been waiting long enough. They show up at the entrance of the Saint-Euzoge Castle to question the Vicomte. We really felt someone who was finally waiting for us to come. When we put him in custody, it's like picking a ripe fruit in the end. It's our only chance, in the end, to have the truth on this case. At Blenaude Gendarmerie, Amaury Darcourt is questioned all morning. He's a male colleague, he hears him. The dialogue goes very well, but he still remains in his position about the fact that he has nothing to do with this story, and that he still thinks that Mr. Bissonnette is innocent. Mr. Darcourt is a man to a woman. So we ask ourselves the question, why not, a colleague being present at that moment, leave the colleague with him? And I arrive, I'm nice, I'm the nice one in the team. I tell him, I'm going to play cards on the table with you. You are a person of honor. You are part of the nobility. I am an officer and I also have a code of honor. So I'm going to tell you, how did it happen? And then he looks at me, he turns white, and he says to us, okay, it was Mr. Bissonnette who ordered the murder of his wife. So I'm a little surprised. The lifeguard knew. So here he is, also involved in the case. And Amaury admitted that Jean-Michel had entrusted him for a very long time, the wish to eliminate Bernadette for various reasons, and in particular the fact that she was never satisfied with anything, that life was difficult, that everything was going badly. For 3 or 4 years, he says like that, in the air, I'm going to kill her. It remained for Amaury Darcourt, something that was indeed quite fantastic and unbelievable. Until the famous day of the 11th of March, where he asks her to come and that her role will be just to make the weapon disappear in the little river which is right next door. That night, the lifeguard was therefore well repressed at the Bissonnettes. Not to get his gun, but to recover the weapon that Belkacem had left in the car. He will say that in fact he had to recover the weapon in a tennis racket case and that he had to then go and throw it where Mr. Bissonnettes had told him to throw it. He makes us a sketch where he describes exactly the place where he threw it. In the process, we send a team of divers and the weapon is found in the exact same place. The lifeguard Amaury Darcourt is put on trial for murder complicity, but he remains free under judicial control. In the end, Dominic, what does this weapon reveal to us? This weapon, Frederick, is a very common weapon. We find a lot of them. It is a classic hunting rifle, caliber 16, with juxtaposed barrels, that is to say 2 barrels next to each other. This one has a particularity, it was sawn. The stock was sawn and the barrel was sawn. It makes it a very, very short weapon, manageable, easy to hide under a garment. The problem is that it is dangerous because a sawn barrel, when you hold it like that and you risk getting hurt, ripping your thumb off while shooting. When we find this weapon, when we fish it back in the river, in the barrel, well, there is still a cartridge. A cartridge in one of the 2 barrels, a cartridge hit, a hunting cartridge, and we know that Madame Bissonnette was killed with hunting lead. Who does this weapon belong to? To Bissonnette or to Darcourt? Neither one nor the other, if we listen to their statements. The gendarmes will try to go back to the history of the weapon. The manufacturer, a Spanish manufacturer, but the company is closed. Check the reference numbers. All the weapons have a reference number, but it was sawn and it will not speak. Is it the weapon of the crime, in fact? It corresponds. What is interesting is that we will find a DNA on this weapon and that when the lab will call the gendarmes and tell them we have a DNA, they will hope to be able to go back to the owner. Unfortunately for them, it is the DNA of Mizian Belkacem, who is the shooter and who says himself, "I am the shooter." So it allows us to know this DNA that Belkacem used this weapon well. It allows us to know the discovery of this weapon, that the Vicomte of Decourt does not lie when he says, "I threw it at that place." We find it at the indicated place. However, it does not give any indication on the client. The instruction judge has the feeling that the Vicomte did not say everything. She is in charge of a personal investigation to meet him in his fief to try to better detain him. When we arrive in Saint-Euzoge, it is quite impressive insofar as we enter the property where there is a great cavalry alley. We see the castle, which is quite massive, which is revealed at the last moment, and he lives in a house quite modest. On July 16, 2008, the personality investigator sits down at the table of the aristocrat. He is someone who has a faith chained to the body, who is over 80 years old, so who approaches the fatal outcome. So at one point he has the problem of being in peace with his conscience. Little by little, the investigator establishes a climate of trust with the old aristocrat. Amaury Darko seems very tired. Psychologically, he is exhausted. He can no longer keep something inside him which, I think, not only prevents him from sleeping, but suffocates him. So it is at that moment that he will tell me to you, "I will tell you the truth." For the first time, Darko recognizes that he fully participated in the crime preparation. It was between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. on Tuesday, March 11th. And during these 3 hours, there will be first, a trip out of the property to get a jacket. A trip during which Jean-Michel will entrust Amaury to find the right person to commit the murder. We return home. Amaury sees himself introduced to Mr. Belkacem. The three men then took advantage of the absence of Bernadette to play, in the garage, a kind of repetition of the murder. For a quarter of an hour, Jean-Michel played the role of Bernadette and Darko, that of the shooting teacher. Instructions will be given to the gardener on the way to operate, the way to handle the weapon, the location on the body that must be aimed to, unfortunately, give death to Bernadette. He does not have the awareness and the measure of what he is doing, and that it remains for him probably something too far away and too irrational for him to have the feeling of having a criminal guilt. He does not stop asking himself, but how could I do that, and especially how could I not stop that? A few days later, Darko even makes new revelations to the judge of instruction. He says that he met Belkacem in front of the gate just after the crime. When he sees Belkacem for the submission of the weapon, he just asks Belkacem how it happened, and Belkacem does not tell him well. We are very perplexed. We are even quite angry because I learn that Amaury Darko has a much more complicated version than it seems, and that in fact he has a much more important role than the one granted to him until now. The statements of the Vicomte Darko change the situation. He gets involved, of course, but his testimony is first in charge against Bissonnette. It is certain that from that moment it has been a phenomenal turn of this case, since two men now accused him. The first accuser, if he was a subordinate of Jean-Michel Bissonnette to the credibility, the second was the childhood friend, his grandfather, his substitute father, which made him a formidable accuser. We saw that through the relations that you could have Mr. Darko with my mother. My mother does not necessarily appreciate Mr. Darko. The values that Mr. Darko had were not those of my parents necessarily. She treated him a bit like a pickpocket. And so when he accuses your father, we do not understand, we are completely naked. And then at the same time we found that the fact that he participated in this crime, we found this logical attitude. Finally, it was an attitude of defense, quite simply. My father has been accused for 2 months by Mizian Belkacem. Apparently the justice accepted this thesis, and it was easy finally to shoot again on the ambulance. And so are you going to suspect that he is the instigator? First, Mason Belkacem has hidden his existence for more than a month and a half, and we found it still curious. That's it. It immediately questioned us. We said to ourselves, but why is my father not there? And suddenly it also comforted us in a thesis that Mr. Belkacem was lying, since he had hidden that he was still one of the accomplices and that it was still an important element. What interest in Maury Darcourt would he have had to have your mother murdered? My mother represented an obstacle, let's say, in the relationship between my father and Mr. Darcourt. That's obvious. I think Mr. Darcourt would have liked to come see my father more often. He ends up at 85 years old with less friends than before, less money too. We learned afterwards in the instruction that my father had made a loan of money to Mr. Darcourt that he had apparently asked for a second one that my mother had opposed, and we're talking about quite large sums. What do you mean? The first time it was 15,000 euros, the second time 30,000 euros that Mr. Darcourt had asked for. The motive of money could be immobile. Master Marshal, you rely on a ballistic element to test your hypothesis. It would be the Viscount who would be the real client. Our theory is that the ballistics comes to support the idea that there has undoubtedly been more than 2 shots. There would be a third shot. We are going to consult one of the experts in ballistics, the best rated in France. This expert tells us there is a problem. There are too many cartridges, there is too much impact, there is too much weight, and undeniably there are undoubtedly 3 shots that were fired. What is the scenario that the defense is advancing? Either Darcourt or Belkacem ring Mrs. Bissonnette opens and the 2 men come in and Belkacem must kill. There is no doubt about it. It's going badly simply because he tears off a part of the hand, the thumb, that there is blood everywhere. Darcourt sees this and no one can doubt for a moment. He is going to thank him, he is going to leave the car a little further. He says to Belkacem, you disappeared, don't come back, and the turn between Guillemette is played. Do Darcourt and Belkacem have links? Do they have contacts between them? If we believe Jean-Michel Bissonnet's, it takes, we are told, Darcourt and Belkacem reunited, the investigators reunited, it takes a quarter of an hour. Well, we have shown that Belkacem and Darcourt had more than an hour to build the project. No one went to check if really Darcourt and Belkacem at the exit of the property Bissonnette were not in a place in their car at. The place that Darcourt had chosen, or chosen by Belkacem, to say there is enough of this woman, she prevents us from having direct access to Jean-Michel Bissonnette and to everything that he is likely to allow us to do together. It would mean that the same day Darcourt and Belkacem would have agreed to assassinate the same evening Madame Bissonnette. In my opinion, it is unquestionable. That's why he doesn't denounce Le Vicomte. But it's so obvious Belkacem, if he is the truth embodied, why doesn't he talk about Darcourt? Why under his conscience he doesn't go all the way? Because he keeps his wallet outside, he has his wallet hot. The gendarmes also study this hypothesis, that of a plot between Darcourt and Belkacem, but very quickly they diverge from this track. We realize that there is no contact, no relationship between Amaury Darcourt and Belkacem, but to be able to cover up such a murder it is necessary to be able to meet. One lives in Blenard in 89 and Lyon, the other lives in 34, so it is necessary that they call each other, or it is necessary that they see each other. But Jan Belkacem hid the presence of the Vicomte, while it is the Vicomte who would have shown him where and how to shoot Bernadette. He explains to the gendarmes why he lied. He is afraid to talk about this individual, the spy believer. Jean-Michel Bissonnette explained to Jan Belkacem that this friend, his older friend who was going to come without naming him, was part of the secret services who knew very important people that he was a specialist in. Arms, a kind of fantasy like that of James Bond, aging and intriguing. The further the investigation goes, the more the gendarmes are convinced that it is Bissonnette who pulled the strings. And besides, Amaury de Harcourt insists if he took up arms, it is surely not for money. No, he is his friend, asks him for a service. I ask you a service, do it for me. The spring is there, it is a psychological and effective spring. There is no mobile, there is simply that at some point Jean-Michel Bissonnette will ask him to intervene. Amari D. Harcourt is 82 years old. He does not have many living friends. He does not have many friends who knew what his life was and his passions, but he is Jean-Michel, who was for him like a son who is always present. And is it not precisely because it is Jean-Michel who asks him to intervene that he does it? As for Abel Kassim, he also claims that he did not act only for money. If he wanted money, he was at Mr. Bissonnette's. Mrs. Bissonnette is dead. Why not have taken the few €100 in the bag of Mrs. Bissonnette? No, he does not touch anything. Jean-Michel Bissonnette had played for the psychological springs in their relationship on the fact that he too was born, as we say here, on the good side of the Mediterranean, that is to say that he too was born in Algeria, who came from the same land, that they also each in their own way was crushed by the war, that things had been difficult. The success of Bissonnette, all that Abel Kassim never had. He, Harky's son, left 3 years in Algeria by his father, repatriated to France. He is a child of shame, that is to say, he will never go to school. He will stay with grandparents who will not particularly love him and who will feed him only because he has only one legitimacy, it is to serve them. The child grew up with the grandfather to keep the sheep, to make them drink the animals, to pick them, to pick up the figs, to pick up the olives, that is to say, it was the man to do everything. So Mizian Gail Kassim grew up thinking that his only justification to be on earth was to obey and serve others, because it was the only reason for which we tolerated him. So he is the absolute figure of the submissive. And with this man used to serve to count for no one, Jean-Michel Bissonnette always knew to be kind. When he comes several times, he serves him a coffee. He tells him, Mizian, you want a coffee? He serves him a coffee. They are in the kitchen, both of them, in a great moment of intimacy like that with someone who will sit at the same table as him, serve him a coffee and share it with him. And for Mizian Gail Kassim, it is an absolute moment of wonder. That is to say, he speaks to me, we are the same in fact. Gail Kassim has a reasoning of an 8-year-old child, so like any child, it is based on love and trust. The gendarmes suspect Bissonnette to have played a very cruel game with his Carib washer. He will indeed tell Mizian Gail Kassim that, like him, to create once again a form of identification, his wife basically leaves him. It obviously echoes his own suffering, which will allow him to manipulate him even better. When Mr. Bissonnette asks him for help because he knows how to do it, Mr. Bissonnette, he will not just ask him to kill his wife, he will tell him, I can't take it anymore. He will ask him for help to him, little Gail Kassim Mizian, but yes, I will do it. Mr. Bissonnette is able, according to the people he has in front of him, to manipulate them and to influence them really. Mr. Genie's at this stage, you know well, the personality of the 3 protagonists. Finally, without the injury of Gail Kassim, it was a perfect crime. If we don't find DNA prints of Mizian Gail Kassim and her thumb, if they don't get hurt, I don't know how we could have done to carry out the investigation as we did. And that we find DNA traces of him in the house, we had nothing abnormal. It's the guy who does gardening, it's the guy who is the car washman, he does the cleaning inside and even in the car. On the morning of the facts, Mr. Bissonnette would have given him the double of the keys of the car, and to disturb the tracks of the technicians in criminal identification, he would have asked him to drive the ladder on the morning of the facts on Tuesday the 11th to go get galleys at a hardware dealer in Castelnau. He had asked him to drive, explaining to him that since he drives, it's normal to find prints, to find traces of his passage in the vehicle. Everything was involved, and that's it. There was no problem on that side. The accusations of the Vicomte de Harcourt did not start the convictions of the family and friends of Bissonnette. All relied to pay him a visit to the prison in Béziers, where he is locked for 18 months. We asked ourselves questions and we put doubts, but today we don't have any more, and above all, we have a deep knowledge of the case, so we really have the conviction that he is innocent today, and that's why we want to fight. I tried to find out the number of times I asked Jean-Michel if he was guilty or not. For me, what happened? Tell me what happened. So several times we had discussions about it. He always affirmed his non-culpability. I can't believe that he wanted to structure and organize his wife's murder. Bissonnet's lawyer did not give up. He continues to file requests for release. All are systematically rejected in the despair of the children. We even see that the father of the victim, my grandfather, the father of my mother, is there and encourages my father and also wants his freedom. So who are we kidding? Who are we kidding? In September 2009, at the 10th rejected request, Jean-Michel Bissonnet cracks in front of the cameras. I'm fed up with the accusations and that they don't want to listen to me. I would like them to listen, and since January they don't listen to me. The defense goes to the offensive. Since every 15 days the Montpellier refuses to release Jean-Michel Bissonnet by saying that it would disturb the public order. They make a poll asking roughly the Montpellier people, did you hear about the Bissonnet case and would you be shocked by his possible release? And to this question the majority answers that they would not be shocked if Bissonnet came out of prison. The results are good, but the poll triggers a controversy. A lawyer went so far as to use an opinion poll made by the people to try to obtain the release of his client suspected of having committed a murder and who has been in preventive detention for 18 months, not sure that this blow would produce the desired effects. The magistrates are very shocked by the method. This poll is perceived by the civil party and I believe also by the justice as a measure of intimidation and defiance. It's a real intoxication. It really became a referendum for the citizens to know what to do with Jean-Michel Bissonnet. It traumatizes the magistrates and they are indignant because they say we are in a kind of American justice. This guy has the means to spend a crazy amount of money to try to influence the judges with money. Very quickly, with the publicity given by the poll and the media, the case fascinates the city of Montpellier. Jean-Michel Bissonnet is part of a family of Blackfeet. The Blackfeet are an important part of the population in Montpellier. We are really in the new rich side, very material, the big house, the giant screen, the swimming pool. There is also a kind of unhealthy curiosity to see a rich man in sight taking off and shouting his innocence. An innocence that Bissonnet continues to shout. In total, he will make 19 requests for release. The first trial of the Bissonnet case opens on September 27, 2010 in front of the Assises de Montpellier. There is a feverish atmosphere. It is the trial of the century in Montpellier. It is a trial that is announced to last 4 or 5 weeks. It is the longest trial in the judicial history of the city. There is a whole system that makes that there is a kind of excitement, a fever, and everyone says to themselves, we will finally see what the Bissonnet case. The accused all encourage the criminal reclusion to perpetuity. Jean-Michel Bissonnet and his former carpenter settle in the box side by side. And it is an image that will weigh on the understanding of the trial and on the opinion, because at no time Jean-Michel Bissonnet does not manifest the slightest movement of retreat or anger. While still, Jean-Michel Bissonnet explains to us that Mizien Belkacem not only killed his wife, but in addition would accuse him wrongly. Well, my faith, they are neck and neck, feeling that all this poses an incident. Louis Vicomte Amaury d'Harcourt appears free, and he attracts the eyes as soon as he arrives. Louis Vicomte has a Voltaire armchair which is outside the box next to the bench of the lawyers. He is free. He arrives free with his little costumes, with his little scarves, and comes to sit kindly in his armchair. A privilege which agitates the defense of Bissonnet. This man was free in front of his jurors to go and come to his guys to be interviewed when we wanted to interview him. But we were in what trial? The trial is just beginning and already a procession of friends marches to the bar to recall how much the Bissonnets loved each other. The support committee is always in these cases active, determined, indicating that Mr. Bissonnet was a good companion, a good hunter, a good golfer, a good husband, and that in these conditions we could not be a bad assassin. Friday, October 1st, 4th day of the trial. The accusation throws a pave in the sea. It is 10:45. The Attorney General, Mr. Grenier, stands up into the court into the parties a certain number of pieces. By interrupting practically the debates and explaining to the President something absolutely extraordinary happens of the highest importance. I have documents to give you which directly concern the background of the case, and we cannot continue the trial without all the parties being examined. So there is a kind of stupor in the room. The President is completely interlocked. Everyone looks at each other. He suspends the debates. And there everyone learns about a set of letters which have been submitted by an individual who would have been incarcerated and who would have made revelations to the police which reveals from Jean-Michel Huisonnet will to fabricate a false witness to come and say in front of the court that Amaury Darcourt was the commander of the murder of Bernadette Huisson. The President of the court announces, "Mr. Huisonnet, you are suspected of subordination of witness." It's a bomb. There I turned to Jean-Michel Huisonnet at the time of the hearing. I asked the President to give me the floor because we didn't know where we were. And I called him and said, "Sir, you say you love your children if you love your children. Tell us the truth today. This is the moment I love." Huisonnet and Blem, his two sons, the rifle of the gays. And it's true that there the room is suspended at Huisonnet's lips because we say he's going to confess. He's going to confess. We are intimately convinced that he's going to tell the truth. He gets up and will say, "I am accused of lying. I defend myself by lying." If they are convinced of their father's guilt, they will be civil parties against their father. For now, they don't have enough hindsight on these new elements to take a stand. The two lawyers of Jean-Michel Bissonnette are stunned. Everyone will understand here that we have a problem of conscience and that it appears to us after thinking that Mr. Bissonnette must go in search of a new defense. We are particularly shocked. I take the decision to no longer assume the defense of Jean-Michel Bissonnette, who at this point deeply disappointed me. The trial is reported. So Dominique, what are these documents that were transmitted to the Court of Assises? That's it, Frederick. This pile of documents is a series of letters of information plans that were written by Jean-Michel Bissonnette in his cell on his computer. He gave these documents to a detainee that we will call the messenger, and that he himself had to give them to another detainee called Laurent, and that Jean-Michel Bissonnette calls Lolo. But this Laurent does not know de Harcourt. No, he never saw the Vicomte de Harcourt. He doesn't even know his head. So, Bissonnette sends him a photo of the Vicomte de Harcourt. He also doesn't know his house or his life. So, Bissonnette sends him a plan of the domain of Saint-Euzodes with the location of the Vicomte's house that he calls delicately the house of the old man. He tells him that we enter directly through the kitchen. There is a large wooden table. He even tells him the location of the jam jars on a shelf in this kitchen. He often speaks about women, the Vicomte, whom he gives to Lolo all the information to be able, when he will be heard by the police, to build his false testimony. To be credible. So credible that he also tells him, Bissonnette to Lolo, he tells him, "Be careful, you have to stay as simple as possible. It is by entering in the details that we can be fooled. You must not do too much. You must know how to stay vague. It must not appear as a lesson learned." So, what does the police so? The police will check this information at the request of the assembly, and finally we will discover that Lolo did not have the intention to produce this false testimony in front of the police. What he wanted above all was to make the master singer and to raise money to Bissonnette. It will not go further. Anyway, Bissonnette had understood it for a long time, and he had decided to interrupt the operation. Against the will of his lawyers, against the will of everyone, by fomenting something that was completely stupid. So I know that the accusation, afterwards, it was also used a lot. Since we blamed my father for being a manipulator, and we blame him again, and we had proof that he had tried to manipulate people. And he did anything. And he knows it. Jean-Michel Bissonnet's lawyers threw the sponge. It is therefore with a new defense that he presents himself in front of the Montpellier Court of Appeal 3 months later. After the fall coup, a large audience rushes to attend the continuation of the Bissonnet leaflet. The rise of the marches of the Court of Appeal was the rise of the marches of the Confestival. We were overwhelmed by journalists, photographers, cameramen. But for Bissonnet, the trial begins badly. It is the gendarmes who testify first. When we get to the bar, we tell our story, we did our job. In addition to that, we did it well, contrary to what the lawyers could say. We tried to say, and the truth came to light. To be able to show them as Jean-Michel Bissonnet considers them, that is to say, small provincial gendarmes who are absolutely amazed to have managed to catch a notary in their net. But this attempt is a failure. The investigators are square, precise. They carry the conviction of the room. Then, when we find ourselves a little between colleagues, or that we think about it, we say to ourselves, the trial may have already been folded because it was still the sine qua non condition. It is to be able to completely erase the gendarmes. They can't do it. A new element in charge is then presented to the court. Internet connections recorded in Jean-Michel Bissonnet's computer. It was either pornography, sadomasochistic heterosexual pornography, or homosexual pornography, that is to say, homosexual relations between men. Under the pseudonym Lufinic, Jean-Michel Bissonnet sometimes goes looking for a woman, but also a man. And we see that he elaborates the profile of a man between 35 and 50 years old. Good chic, good people, because he puts BCBG. It is the man he is looking for. And in his wishes, on the dating website, he writes that he wants to flirt with romance to spice up his life. It leaves a rather interesting opening of the mind. So was Jean-Michel Bissonnet satisfied even within his couple? The lawyers of the Bissonnet family may have riposted. He established a profile and then there was never a connection. He never responded to any announcement. In the room, the doubt is born. The Bissonnets may have been just a couple of facades. A track that the gendarmes have developed on the side. Mr. Bissonnet is still a little bit held by Mrs. He would like to have a life a little more strass and glitter, I think. But he will never be able to have because Mrs. Bissonnet is very strict. She tightens the screw a little bit. The lawyer of Bernadette's brother immediately goes into the breach. And that's when the Bâtonnier crystal arrived. One of the great talents of the Baron of Montpellier and who, I can say, gave us a kind of nice Provençal tale. He imagined that Mr. Bissonnet at some point was totally fed up with this life, this perfect happiness, that maybe he aspired to other things, but that his wife suffocated him, that he could not express himself, that the only way to express himself was to kill her. So this is a seductive mobile. Because the problem of the mobile was annoying. We could not find the mobile. There was only one misfortune. There was nothing in the file to support this thesis. Nothing at all. Not the shadow of a testimony. Not the shadow of a small fact. As the trial progressed, Bissonnet became agitated, debated, and lost his composure. You are destroying my children. It was you who had destroyed the public. When we saw him in his box, agitated, shouting, he was scared. He must have scared them to swear. And we must have thought maybe it's him. Maybe he's capable. You saw how he did. Since the beginning of the trial, Bissonnet is under tranquilizer, treated for depression. On the morning of February 3rd, in the box, his nerves are weak. So he is in a situation where he can no longer hear this trial. And he leaves it. The calm of the other two accused cuts with the hysteria and the aggressiveness of Bissonnet. The gardener does not seek to atone for his guilt. Mesian is simple, he is square. He says things, but he doesn't say too much. When he says, "I killed him," for him, that's enough. The old man is elsewhere. The appropriate term for Amaury Durcourt's attitude is probably the term detached. We don't have the feeling that he is in the trial. The trial advances, but not in the sense desired by Bissonnette. The thesis of the plot is still a flop. If Mizian Belkacem had decided to assassinate Bernadette Bissonnette, he doesn't need Amaury Durcourt to assassinate Bernadette Bissonnette. In the same way, if Amaury Durcourt decided to seize Bissonnette's fortune, he absolutely does not need Mizian Belkacem. The only link between these two men is Jean-Michel Bissonnette. It is he who calls each other to tell them to come on the 11th. And why the 11th? Because the 11th at night is the meeting of the Rotary. It's the perfect alibi. The trial comes to an end. Its lawyers and those of its children have chosen to plead the absence of mobile and, above all, the doubt. I consider that on these accusations we cannot deny a conviction of Jean-Michel Bissonnette that there is a doubt that is sufficiently large to be found. We do not condemn a man by absurdity. We do not condemn a man by saying the only possible hypothesis is that it is him. That is unacceptable. Otherwise, I warn you, we are all in danger. This Friday, February 11th, the Montpellierains line up to hear the verdict. We all know that he will be convicted. We hear the verdict for Lou Jardinier. For Mizian Belkacem, 20 years of criminal imprisonment. For Armand Intercourt. For Lou Vicomte, 8 years of imprisonment. Then for Jean-Michel Bissonnette, a very heavy verdict, 30 years of criminal imprisonment. It is so inaudible for him that the moment he hears that he is sentenced to 30 years of criminal imprisonment, he collapses. He faints. He is taken to the corridor behind and he shouts. The whole press reports shitty justice. Jean-Michel Bissonnette appeals. 9 months later, on Monday, November 7th, 2011, third round. The trial opens in Carcassonne in front of the Court Diocese de l'Aude. Belkacem and Durcourt did not appeal. It was Parquet who did it for them. For Jean-Michel Bissonnette, nothing has changed. New setting, the same system of defense. He still hopes to be acquitted. Master Leonard guesses he will have to defend his client against himself. I immediately understood that Mr. Bissonnette had a strong power of nuisance and not pejorative on his own defense. So I kept away. After 10 days of trial, the lawyer takes the consequences. And I felt that if his defense continued to block to support only the innocents, we have the right to a confirmation of his 30 years of criminal reclusion. So, since Jean-Michel Bissonnette camps on his positions, Master Leonard decides to change strategy. Well, you see, I felt very deeply that the meaning of my duty was to open a door, that of the hypothesis of the guilt of Mr. Bissonnette. And if Mr. Bissonnette was guilty, what should he think? And our colleague Leonard has replaced the guilt of Jean-Michel Bissonnette. Let's make of Jean-Michel Bissonnette the man who had the initiative of the project, that he was overwhelmed by this project, and that, finally, it made him human. And finally, he invites the jury to think. Master Marshal, were you aware that Master Leonard was going to plead the possible guilt of Mr. Bissonnette? Master Leonard, with our agreement, does it. But he does it, and I remind everyone, so that there is no ambiguity, he does it in the form of the hypothesis that may have germinated as a certainty of the guilt of Jean-Michel Bissonnette in the minds of the jurors. And you, what do you say to the jurors? I have no other space of freedom than that of pleading acquittal. And I am very comfortable and intellectually and in terms of conviction to plead this acquittal. No one has heard me plead anything other than the acquittal. I believe that I had it deep inside me, this acquittal. It was part of my conviction. On November 25th, the Court of Appeal therefore returns its verdict. It confirms the sentences for Belkacem and for Darcourt. They built a life to live a happy retirement, and they were ready to live it. Their life is upset. It's different from what it was before. And we have to move forward. But it's hard. After deciding to resign, Jean-Michel Bissonnette finally threw the towel at the request of his son, Florent. At 64, he gave up the fight to free his children from this nightmare.